Hurricane death toll rises to 100 in Florida. Destructive hurricanes fuel calls for Biden to declare climate emergency. 5 years after Las Vegas mass shooting, gun violence is never ending in the U.S. Americans are pinching pennies to make ends meet with skyrocketing inflation. At least 19 killed after protesters storm police station in southeast Iran. Indonesia's first high-speed train is on track ahead of trial in November. From Toronto studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Saamiyah Syed. Our top story tonight, the death toll from Hurricane Ian rose to 100 on Monday. Questions are being raised about the landfall of Ian in Florida. It landed 5 miles away from where the forecast located it. Miami Herald reports that Fort Myers Beach residents continue to exit their devastated island on foot Sunday. Environmental activists are renewing calls for President Joe Biden to declare a climate emergency as Puerto Rico and Florida reel from a pair of hurricanes. Hurricane Ian made landfall again Friday as a Category 1 storm in South Carolina. NASA climate scientist Peter Kalmus is among those demanding more action from the U.S. government. He tweeted Thursday, declaring a climate emergency isn't a catchphrase. It's a vital suite of actions to protect people and the planet from this crisis. John Su at the Center for Biological Diversity co-wrote a February report detailing some steps Biden could take to transition from planet-wrecking fossil fuels. Climate campaigners have since ramped up pressure on the president. That includes through actions like an indigenous-led blockade outside the U.S. Department of Interior. Another tactic was delivering a 16-foot inflatable globe and nearly 500,000 petition signatures to the White House in August. Progressive commentator Katie Halper says she was censored and fired by media outlet The Hill over a segment defending Representative Rashida Tlaib's characterization of Israel as an apartheid state. Mainstream human rights organizations have used the term to describe the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians. Halper's segment was part of Hill's morning TV program, Rising, for which she worked as a guest co-host. Executives blocked the monologue from airing on the platform. Another Hill TV co-host, Ryan Grimm, described the move as unprecedented for the show. Grimm wrote Friday he has recorded more than 150 monologues without an approval process. Halper spoke publicly about the censorship Thursday evening on her live stream. She later delivered the block segment in full with the Michigan Democrats' comments about Israel for the independent outlet Breakthrough News. On Friday, organizers said the staff of 2 progressive U.S. congresspersons became the second and third offices to unionize in the country. House Democrats passed a historic resolution enabling them to do so earlier this year. The resolution stemmed from the successful union election by staffers of outgoing Michigan Democratic Representative Andy Levin. After its adoption, the offices of Democratic Representatives Ro Khanna of California and Ilhan Omar of Minnesota voted to form unions. Courtney Rose Loddick, VP of Organizing with the Congressional Workers Union, applauded the move. She called it a monumental moment. Omar welcomed the development, tying it to a resurgence of the U.S. labor movement. Meanwhile, workers at major corporations in the United States, including Amazon, Apple, Google, and Starbucks, are fighting to unionize. Family and friends of 34-year-old Ali Osman, who was fatally shot by police, gathered at the Islamic Community Center of Tempe, Arizona on Friday to pay their respects. On September 24th, 2 Phoenix patrol units were struck by unknown items causing damage, spokesman Sergeant Brian Bowers said. Bauer said after initially driving away, officers returned to the area to investigate and saw Osman throwing rocks at one of the patrol cars. Police told Osman to stop, but he continued throwing rocks at the officers, who then fatally shot Osman, Bauer said. Osman's family members said he suffered from mental illness and was receiving regular treatment. Following Friday's memorial service, Osman's body was laid to rest at Al-Rahma Muslim Cemetery near Maricopa. The United States gun violence epidemic persists 5 years after the deadliest mass shooting in the nation's modern history. On October 1st, 2017, 58 people were gunned down by Stephen Paddock, a disgruntled shooter who opened fire at a concert in Las Vegas. The 64-year-old gunman went on a 15-minute rampage from his 32nd floor hotel room, terrorizing thousands of concertgoers. More than 850 people were injured, and the shooter had killed himself by the time police stormed his room. Mass shootings make up a tiny fraction of gun deaths in the U.S., but their numbers have risen over the years. Sandra McKay is with the Firearms Injury Prevention and Safety at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. She said more than 45,000 people die annually from firearm injuries. A Muslim group is asking a federal court to make the city of Troy, Michigan pay $1.95 million in legal fees and damages after winning a religious discrimination lawsuit. The mosque opened several weeks ago in a building that formerly housed a restaurant and banquet center. The Adam Community Center fought a legal battle with the city for 4 years. 2 lawsuits were filed in the U.S. District Court in Detroit over Troy's rejection of the mosque. In March, the court ruled in favor of the U.S. Department of Justice, which filed one of the lawsuits. The center filed the other lawsuit, and both sides were ordered to work together to resolve matters. A story on Americans pinching their pennies to make ends meet with skyrocketing inflation comes with details after the break, so stay tuned and we will be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Abdul Malik Mujahid. Muslims get bombarded with negative news, so good things which we do remain unknown. For example, do you know that Muslim Americans helped stop the genocide in Bosnia? Recently, Muslim Americans defeated Apple, Coca-Cola, Nike, and their lobbies to get a law passed through Congress about Uyghurs. Do you also know that it were Muslim Americans who work hard and smart to block Modi from entering the United States for 10 years? Yes, Alhamdulillah. All of that is your credit. Let's keep doing the good thing. Alhamdulillah, 3 achievers of our community are coming to Chicago to help strengthen Justice for All. Justice for All is a human rights organization run by Muslims based in Chicago. We will honor Arsalan Suleiman, a young person raised in our communities who filed a lawsuit on Burma because of the Rohingya genocide. We'll also honor Ambassador Rashad Hussain, raised in our communities, married in Chicago, and who is now the ambassador at large for international religious freedom. In addition, we will honor the latest commissioner of USERF, Imam Muhammad Majid, for his relentless support for Burma Task Force. Please join me. Let's come together on October 9th in Chicago. Scan this code to register or visit justiceforall.org/Chicago. Assalamu alaikum.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. Now, Americans are pinching pennies to make ends meet amid skyrocketing inflation. Since the start of 2022, the rate of inflation has hovered between 8 and 9%. It hit its peak during the summer when the national average for gas was more than $5 a gallon. Video producer Jason Walker from Austin, Texas, said prices in the post-pandemic world are starting to pinch at the gas pump. He said gas is one of those things that you cannot not buy. It's something you have to have. He still spends about $70 to $80 to fill up his tank. Walker said grocery shopping for his family has also become a lot more challenging. To make ends meet, Walker has started working for Uber Eats in his spare time. A special segment is coming up later on our show tonight, so keep watching Muslim News. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation on Saturday condemned the ousting of Burkina Faso's president, Paul Henry Damiba, by military officers. The Jeddah, Saudi Arabia-based organization said the change came at a time when the international community is committed to supporting Burkina Faso's peaceful political transition to holding free elections. OIC Secretary General Hussein Brahim Taha called for calmness and upholding the spirit of dialogue and responsibility to achieve security and stability. On Friday, a group of military officers headed by Army Captain Ibrahim Traoré deposed Damiba, dissolved the transitional government, and suspended the constitution. It was the second takeover in the West African state in less than a year. Damiba seized power after overthrowing former President Roch Kabore in January. A 7-year-old Palestinian boy who died during an Israeli army search in the occupied West Bank was buried Friday. Washington is calling for a thorough investigation into Rayyan Yasser Suleiman's death. His body was wrapped in a keffiyeh checkered Palestinian headscarf as hundreds of people took part in a funeral procession. The boy's cousin, Mohammed Suleiman, said Rayyan had run and fallen Thursday after returning from school to find soldiers inside and outside his home. He was taken to nearby Beit Jala Hospital where he was declared dead, the cousin told AFP. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry said Suleiman died after falling from a building while being chased by Israeli occupation forces. The Israeli army said its soldiers had searched the area after a number of Palestinians hurled rocks towards civilians. It said an initial inquiry found no connection between the searches by the IDF and the boy's death. Indonesia's and Southeast Asia's first high-speed rail project is expected to connect the country's largest cities of Jakarta and Bandung. It will cover a distance of roughly 88.4 miles. The high-speed train cars arrived at Tanjung Priok Port, Jakarta on September 2nd. The test of the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed train will coincide with the implementation of the G20 summit in November. Indonesia's President Joko Widodo and China's President Xi Jinping are expected to ride the train in its trial run. China was selected by the Indonesian government over Japan to build the fast train rail link, estimated to cost more than $6 billion. Heavy clashes erupted in the city of Zahedan in Iran's southeastern Sistan-Baluchistan province Friday after a group of armed protesters stormed a police station. It led to a firefight after Friday prayers outside a police station a few blocks from a mosque, according to reports. At least 19 people were killed and 20 others wounded in Friday's violence, Provincial Governor Hossein Modareshkiabani said. He labeled the attackers terrorists and separatists. He said they intended to take over the police station after damaging its walls and throwing incendiary material. Videos circulating on social media show gory scenes of wounded people being taken away amid plumes of smoke and intermittent gunfire in the background. Coming up after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we will be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dawood Warnsby. About 30 years ago, I walked into a mosque for the first time here in Canada, and I felt pretty strange. The reason I felt so weird? Well, in those days, it wasn't easy to walk into a mosque and find someone else who was a shaggy-haired singer-songwriter who wrote poetry and worked professionally as a puppeteer. I had no idea how I was going to fit in culturally or creatively with this new community. I quickly realized that there was a long and rich history of arts in the Muslim community that went hand in hand with education and learning. A little while later, I came upon a magazine from an organization called Sound Vision. And they had a little blurb at the back of the magazine that said, "If you're creative, we'd love to work with you." I took some songs that I'd been writing, put them on a little cassette and called them A Whisper of Peace, sent them through to Sound Vision. I had no idea that over 25 years later, I would still be working with Sound Vision. Things have really changed over the last quarter century. Now we see tons of creative commercial Muslim artists making music and videos and film and television and comedy and cartoons. It's wonderful. But sadly, we're also still seeing a lack of educational materials for young children. Sound Vision continues to be one of the only non-profit media producers creating quality educational content for Muslim children and families. Children need mentors and teachers who are able and willing to help inspire them with wisdom, self-esteem, and care for their world. The Adam's World series has been rebooted as an app with new episodes and new songs. We have the popular Adam's World Club and the Colors of Islam classes for children and youth to attend online. And now there's a new program in the works called Falafel Dude, helping school children learn to be better citizens, better neighbors, and better Muslims. Join me in supporting Sound Vision's ongoing work however you can, so that we can continue to inspire Muslim children and families for generations to come. Assalamu alaikum.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. To discuss the cost of living and inflation in the U.S., let's go to Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you. And now we dive into today's discussion with a special guest, Dr. Fadhel Kaboub. We're going to be discussing, inshallah, the issue of inflation and in rising inequality in the United States. What's the cause of it? What can be done about it? What shouldn't be done about it? We're very happy to discuss those issues with Dr. Kaboub. Let's bring him on. You all know him. He's been a guest on the program numerous times. He's a professor of economics at Denison, and he serves as president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Kaboub. How are you?
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me back on the show. I'm doing great.
No, thank you for coming back, mashallah. So let's dive in. There's a new CBO report that gave us some indication of the difficulties the American people continue to face economically and in terms of inequality. Can you tell us about the CBO report and what it showed?
Well, in a way, it is shocking, but not surprising, because we've seen this trend build up for the last couple of decades. And what the CBO is showing in this report is that while wealth has tripled in the last decades on average for American families, the distribution of that wealth has been massively unequal, in the sense that the bottom 50% of the population in the US is only accumulating 2% of the national wealth, where we also have the top 1% of the wealth distribution essentially controlling a third of the wealth of the nation. That is a level of inequality that we haven't seen in the US before. And that basically tells us that we fundamentally, from a structural perspective, we have an economic engine that automatically distributes more wealth to the top. And what we should be doing is, instead of keeping the same engine that produces inequality, produces socioeconomic exclusion, and then wondering how we're going to redistribute this unequal situation back into something more reasonable, because redistribution is very difficult if you haven't noticed politically. Instead of doing this, what we need to be doing is completely changing the engine altogether and replacing it with an engine that does the right kind of pre-distribution instead of fighting in a system of redistribution. And that's really the biggest economic challenge and political challenge that we face in this country. And that's a problem of governance, a problem of democracy, fundamentally.
So, Dr. Kaboub, then what does the solution look like? Because obviously this has been, I mean, the debate of the 20th century was, what is the proper economic model for a country, a government to follow? And there were literally wars fought about this for decades. There'd be socialists, communists, capitalists, somewhere in between. What to your mind then is the ideal engine that would lead to more equality, and obviously not complete economic equality, that's possible in the world, but less inequality? What does that engine look like?
Well, we have the blueprint for the economic model, and it starts from the Constitution, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So, and when it comes to regulating the economic system, because economic policy is made up of a legal framework that's created by the 535 lawmakers that we elect in Washington, D.C. And setting up that legal framework allows us to design the right way of pre-distributing wealth. In the current system, we have a political system that's heavily influenced by big pharma, by Wall Street, by the multinational corporations that suck wealth from the nation, from the working class, and from the rest of the world, to be honest. So we have to have the political courage to redesign public policy in a way that's more fair and equitable and inclusive. And that's really fundamentally a question of democracy. It's not a question of socialism versus capitalism versus any kind of other ism. It's a question of using the foundation that we have in the Constitution and designing a legal framework that allows people to thrive as workers, as citizens, as opposed to setting up a system that allows for the formation of monopolies and cartels and oligopolies. Our antitrust laws, for example, are outdated. They're more than 100 years old. And they were not written and designed for a world of big pharma, of super PACs, a world of Silicon Valley, big tech companies. And we haven't had the political courage to rethink the way we write the laws of the land when it comes to corporate power in this country.
Interesting. So it sounds like what I'm hearing from you, Dr. is that we've got so much political power concentrated in the hands of major giant corporations that eat up other corporations whenever they have a good idea. And so strengthening antitrust laws, you think, might be one way to increase competition and separate and divide up that power. And so you don't have corporations, giant corporations, wielding so much power and influence over our political system and over tax breaks and other such things. Let me ask you this. So we've got the inflation situation that's going on. Since I last spoke to you, are things actually getting better, leveling off? What's the situation on inflation? Because my understanding is that also is something that harms quote unquote working class people more immediately and more directly than necessarily people who have more wealth stored up.
Well, the inflation situation is obviously hasn't been resolved in the US or globally. And it's specifically because the inflation pressure points that we're dealing with have persisted. Their root causes have persisted, and we're not tackling the root causes. For example, when it comes to the actual inflation pressure points in the US, we had inflation pressure points that have existed for the last 2 or 3 decades, pre-COVID, pre the conflict in the Ukraine. And then we added on top of it the supply chain disruptions related to the global COVID pandemic that added to, shipping delays and manufacturing delays and shortages of components and things like that, and the big traffic jam in the oceans for shipping components. That adds inflation. And then, of course, with the conflict in the Ukraine, we have 2 additional major pressure points related to food and energy prices globally, and also prices of raw materials from Russia, minerals and things like that that are very critical for manufacturing globally. And that just increases commodity prices across the board. So all of these inflation pressure points still persist, and there's no reason to believe that they're going to go away, magically when the Federal Reserve Bank decides to raise interest rates. So raising interest rates here by the Federal Reserve Bank will not find a diplomatic solution to the conflict in the Ukraine. So it's not going to tame that inflation pressure point. It's not going to undo the logistical delays and the supply chain disruptions that we have for the last 2 years related to COVID. Raising interest rate doesn't solve that. It's way outside the jurisdiction of the Fed. And then the earlier pre-existing inflation pressure points that we had in the US before 2020 are from 4 major areas. 1 is healthcare, 2 is higher education, 3 is energy and transportation, and 4 is real estate and housing. And again, the Fed raising interest rates is not going to give us a different healthcare system or tame the abusive market power of big pharma, of health insurance companies, or solve the student debt crisis. A lot of these inflation pressure points are long-term, structural, and they're actually in the jurisdiction of Congress rather than the Federal Reserve Bank. But instead, when the Fed raises interest rate, because they think that's the only policy tool that is available to the country, when they raise interest rate, they increase the cost of doing business. In other words, they slow down the economy. They actually cause unemployment. And the Fed has been pretty honest the last few weeks, saying that they're willing to cause a recession if they have to. Because when they cause a recession, unemployed people can't buy additional goods and services. So that reduces the demand and allows the supply to catch up a little bit. And that literally translates into throwing some people under the bus, the most vulnerable people under the bus, in order to fight inflation with interest rates, instead of doing the right thing, which is addressing the underlying causes of inflation.
Well, you answered my next question, which is going to be, could the Fed end up causing harm through what they're doing? I think you've answered that question. Of course, we as Muslims know, there's all this jurisprudence about why interest rates on debt are bad and riba and all that stuff. And so you can kind of see this manifested in real life through this financial experiment that keeps happening over and over again. So it sounds like what you're saying is, look, the inflation problem, a lot of that is just a result of current events, right, that are not going to be fixed overnight, number one. In the meantime, what the Fed is doing could create more problems than it solves. And in the meantime, Congress is not getting anything done. So this is all, it seems like this is all bad news all around, So what can be done in the short term, do you think? I mean, even if it's on an individual family level, what is there anything positive that anyone can do to try to address these issues in the short term while Russia's at war with Ukraine, the Fed is doing what it's doing, Congress is not doing anything? Is there anything anyone can do, or should we just be raising our voices, saying you've got to make structural change to address these problems?
Well, believe it or not, in the midst of all of this mess and all of this negative kind of context that I provided, there is actually a glimmer of hope, even from Congress, from President Biden, because when you think of what the Inflation Reduction Act was about, when you think of the partial student debt cancellation was about, these are actually anti-inflation policies. Notice that the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, part of it was going after the abusive market power of corporations, including pharmaceuticals. So the government will be negotiating at least the prices of 20 some major drugs to lower the cost. that is part of going after the abusive market power of Big Pharma. The Inflation Reduction Act, believe it or not, includes strategic spending on renewable energy infrastructure to encourage the production and use of electric vehicles here in the US. That is good news because it increases job creation and it allows us to wean the economy off of fossil fuels and off of one of the sources of inflation, which is fossil fuel prices, global energy prices. But we're doing it a little too late and on a much, much smaller scale. So one of the things we can do as a country, as informed citizens, is call for more of the above, more student debt cancellation, more taxing and regulation of abusive market power, democratizing the economy, and more strategic investments that will tame these sources of abusive market power and sources of inflation related to fossil fuels, healthcare costs, and so on. We've done a little bit of it under the Inflation Reduction Act and the student debt partial debt cancellation, but we should be doing way more on a more sustained basis. As individual consumers, we need to be, and as members of a democratic society, especially the media, we need to be calling out corporations who are actually taking advantage of the COVID crisis, taking advantage of the inflation crisis, taking advantage of the conflict in the Ukraine, and blaming everything on these global events in order to raise their prices, not just to cover the cost of doing business, but they're doing above and beyond covering the cost of doing business. They're actually widening their profit margins and reporting record prices, and they're actually speaking about it publicly. When you listen to the shareholder conference calls that the CEOs and CFOs are actually announcing this publicly. They're saying the pricing environment is favorable, we're able to raise prices, and nobody's complaining, not the government, not the public, so we're going to go ahead and widen our profit margins. These are the kinds of things that we need to engage with directly, and that affects us immediately in terms of our budget, in terms of grocery costs and cost of health and transportation. All of these things affect us.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Professor. We appreciate that perspective and insight, and we look forward to having you back in the future, God willing, to hopefully discuss some more positive economic news, inshallah. Thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. And we'll send it back to you.
Thank you so much, Edward. That's all from our Toronto studios tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.